From Christian Smith, wake up. Let us wake up, not just from the Sunday morning exhaustion, from the wish of a few more drowsy minutes in bed. Let us wake up to this world that we live in, to its beauty and wonder, and also to its tragedy and pain. Let us wake up to this reality that not all in our world have what we do, however much or little that is. We must wake up to the idea that our wholeness, our lives, are only as complete as the lives of those around us, of those we are inextricably tied to in the great web of mutuality of which we are all a part. We must stay woke, hashtag included, in the words of our friends and colleagues involved in Black Lives Matter, working every day for racial justice in our country. Let us wake up. Let us stay awake. Let us stay woke. And now, in this time and place, let us worship together. So today we have a special reading preceding our wonderful, wonderful service planned. And it comes from Martin Luther King's speech, I have been to the mountaintop. Martin Luther King wrote this speech for the sanitation workers' strike, for the strike of sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, during the Civil Rights Movement. And he prefaces this speech with the idea that God has given him the opportunity to live in any time period he might choose. And he goes through all of the different time periods that are famous throughout history, ancient Greece, to see all of the famous philosophers, the Roman Empire, even into the U.S. in the 30s, during the financial crisis of the time. And he ends it with saying, strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say, if you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy. Now that's a strange statement to make because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land, confusion all around. It's a strange statement, I know, somehow, that when it is dark enough that you can see that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And I see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men, in some strange way, are responding. Something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up, and wherever they are assembled today, whether they are in Johannesburg, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Accra, Ghana, New York City, Atlanta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, or Memphis, Tennessee, the cry is always the same. We want to be free.
Let me extend my personal welcome to everyone here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Oak Cliff. My name is Ryan Conley, and I have the pleasure of serving as your worship leader this morning, or service leader. I haven't figured out quite what that title is yet, but thank you for braving the cold. And I can say that I probably speak from a minority view among you that I actually really enjoy the cold. I think I got that opinion from Mavis and Sherry this morning, who shared their dislike of the situation. Okay. In July of 1964, Reverend James Reeb delivered his final sermons at the All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. In his sermon, he gave us a discouraging message, warning his congregation that if you had come this morning to hear a message of hope, in many ways he would have to discourage them. He went on to say, there were many people who seemed to feel that once we had the March on Washington and once we had the Civil Rights Bill, things were just inevitably going to be easier. That somehow we've done it. And I can say to you only that I think that is the most dangerous kind of self-delusion that we have not in any way done it. And that just to the extent of what we think we have, we're going to be dismayed when we find out that we have not. And just to the extent that we permit ourselves to be emotionally dismayed, we find ourselves as individuals will, in some small way, add to this thing that is known as the backlash, which is real, and I feel, in many ways, growing, and in many ways, possibly stronger than we surmise as yet. 8 months after he delivered his final sermon, Jim Reeb went to Selma, Alabama, to show support for the voting rights campaign there, and in less than 24 hours, he was attacked on a street corner by 4 men that he never met. James Reeb died 2 days later in a Birmingham hospital. While 4 men were captured and charged and tried, there was no conviction by an all-white jury. He was just 38 years old, leaving behind a wife and 4 children. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his eulogy during his memorial service. I have often spoken to you about the need to reclaim our religious language. Likely I will be interested in writing a sermon series on this topic, if I'm so motivated to do so. But today I wanted to reclaim a word that I think we should start using. So what is a miracle? While I feel strongly that this is something that you and I could tell you what a miracle actually is, but it may not be what you believe what it is, and that's perfectly fine. But I just want to share with you my perspective of what a miracle is. A miracle is something unexpected, but not impossible. Maybe seemingly impossible and against the odds, but possible nonetheless. A miracle isn't something supernatural, but rather miracles are created by people. They start with the hopes and dreams of a people experience injustice or are struggling in some type of fashion, and they come together to effect great change. Rarely is it just one person, but a group of committed individuals who finally decide to come together and do something about it. One of the greatest miracles that I can describe was the 1956 bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, the very event where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King entered the national spotlight. During the height of Jim Crow, black people were segregated to the rear of the bus. They would have to first board the bus, pay their fare, step off the bus, and again re-enter the bus at the rear of the bus. Oftentimes, the bus driver would drive off after they paid off their fare before they had the opportunity to get on the bus. Of course, we know of the arrest of Rosa Parks, which led to the boycott, but a lesser-known Lucille Times likely gave them the idea. She experienced by the same bus driver, Rosa Parks experienced, by the way, where he made her pay her fare, then he drove off. And she got so angry that she would drive around in the morning and pick people up at the bus stops and give them a free ride, just to her own personal boycott of the bus system there. Here we had a group of people facing an injustice and came together to fight. It was a true miracle because the sheer numbers of people that participated. Virtually every person of color in Montgomery participated in the boycott. Mind you, these are people that depended upon the bus for their transportation to and from work. But instead, they walked. They carpooled. They worked together, rain or shine. They worked together, and that bus boycott lasted for 382 days. That, to me, is an example of a true miracle. I used to have a spiritual practice, and I'm going to try to find some way to emulate it. During this weekend, I would honor that bus boycott by trying to walk everywhere I wanted to go. Walk to the store, walk to church. I did it when I lived in Phoenix, Arizona. So it was a bit easier, where we had planned road systems with adequate lanes and spaces for riding bikes or walking. A little bit more challenging here, but I want to find some way I can emulate and respect and honor that cherished spiritual practice I used to have. Martin Luther King Jr. came to speak to the Unitarian Universalist Association on May 18, 1966, during what was called the Ware Lecture of the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. The Ware Lecture was started by a 19th century family of Unitarians, prominent ministers of the era, who donated money to pay for someone to come and speak to the organization, someone from usually outside of our organization to give us a message. Some very prominent speakers have been Ware lecturers, including Reverend Jesse Jackson, Martin Luther King Jr., of course. Holly Near was a speaker when I attended a General Assembly some years ago as well. But when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his speech to us, it had to me a very impactful message that we can use for today. He entitled his speech, Staying Awake During the Revolution. He opened it up talking about the story of Rip Van Winkle. Most of us know the story. Rip Van Winkle fell asleep for 20 years. But what he wants to point out is when that Rip Van Winkle awoke, the world around him didn't seem to be all that different. It wasn't until he got to the inn and saw, instead of a picture of King George III, he saw a picture of George Washington. He slept during the Revolution. And he was encouraging the Unitarian Universalist Association and members to stay awake during this revolution. And he gave us some suggestions. First, he asked us to instill within our congregations a world perspective. He recognized that through modern technology, even then, the world was becoming geographically one. And he encouraged the Unitarian Universalist Association to recognize this oneness and approach and embrace diversity in the world. Second was to reaffirm over and over and over again the essential immorality of racial segregation. Quoting Paul Tillich, he stated that segregation is but an affirmation of man's tragic estrangement, his terrible separation, and his awful sinfulness. The necessity to refute the idea that are superior and inferior races. This is something that we continue to struggle even in our own congregations. My identity up here as someone delivering this service might be an indication of that struggle. Coretta Scott King, in an interview with Rosemary Bray McNatt of the UU World magazine in 2002 stated that she and Martin considered even joining the Unitarian movement. But tragically, she said, "We gave it a lot of thought of becoming Unitarian at one time, but Martin and I realized that we could never build a mass movement of black people if we were Unitarian." A tragedy, I think, to realize that they couldn't embrace our movement because of that. He encouraged us to do something in a more positive manner to support any legislation by writing your congressional representatives and support the community and mobile and organize and support the community so that change can be realized. The 1964 Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Bill of 1965 were passed largely due to the ecumenical movements of Protestants, Catholics, and Jews working together. We realize that that's important for us to do as well, is work with others to accomplish our goals. And then finally he stated that he was deeply appalled to hear people proclaim that because the civil rights struggle was over simply because they have the 1964 Civil Rights Bill with 10 titles and a voting rights bill, that people would say it's over. The revolution is not yet won. The very freedoms gained by the people who fought and died for them, like Reverend Dr. King and Reverend Reed, and even people like Harvey Milk, are quickly being eroded away around us. We are under attack, and we cannot stay asleep during this revolution. Our opponents actually feel it's their revolution, that they're restoring back what they lost. Already we have seen a woman's right to determine her own reproductive choices stripped away, and they're not stopping at that. Directly are in the crosshairs are LGBTQ rights and even the rights for the advancement of colored people. Social media platforms that allow people to express themselves, that have allowed people to share unvetted and unverified propaganda, simply lies, misinformation, turning us into the bad guys, we are trying to destroy America somehow, a country which we help build ourselves. Simply ridiculous. They are using these platforms to drive these social issues used to divide us. Foreign adversaries are doing it. Individuals within our community who have terrible, terrible ideas are using these platforms to do so. I remember after September 11th attacks how the country seemed to gather together during that really hard time. It's a different world out there. The situation in Los Angeles is a prime example of plastering up images of female and persons of color, leaders in their community, and calling them diversity hires, implying apparently that women aren't qualified for that job, that people of color are not qualified for that job. I was listening to a podcast where a prominent right-wing commentator says when he gets on an airplane and he sees a person of color in the cockpit, that he's worried that that is a diversity hire, as if to say that they are unqualified to do the job. As if to say that airlines, which I work for, don't take their responsibility of ensuring that people are highly qualified for that position. It's just a slap in the face. Title V of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 was meant to kind of make a deal with social media companies. If you help us stop human trafficking, an extremely important and noble concept, child trafficking stuff, we'll give you a free pass. We'll exempt you from taking responsibility for the content of what is posted on your social media platforms. Think of this, like when CNN did a story about a young man who was wearing a MAGA hat, arguing with people across the way, and in between them there was a Native American man playing a drum. I don't know if you remember that. Trying to create some peace between some two individuals. CNN wrote that he was being disrespectful to the Native American man. He wasn't. He was still an awful person, but he wasn't being disrespectful to the Native American man. His family sued successfully CNN. Heck, we have Trump, who just sued successfully ABC News. Those organizations are not exempt from what is being said in content, on their content. They can be sued. Social media companies cannot. So maybe it's time that we should rethink that agreement and look at maybe making and holding social media companies responsible for their content. I think a lot of what we see in the world today may be curbed by that reality. But what's important is that we have to continue to reach out to our neighbors. And we will do this with love and not hate. I only recently started going back onto social media platforms, and I am a very matter-of-fact ENTP personality person who just tells you how it is. I like to fight, I like to argue, I like to attack, but that doesn't work. I'm realizing that. So even though I took a hiatus, I have to rethink how I'm going to approach these people and find better and more effective ways to communicate with them. Because like I said before, I used to hold some of these horrible beliefs myself. And if there is hope for me, there certainly is hope for them as well. We need to create another miracle, now more than ever, to effect change and to restore what we are quickly losing. And we won't do so if we don't remain awake during this phase of the revolution. Love today, love tomorrow, and love forever. And together, we can make a new miracle. Amen.
Our closing words today also come from Martin Luther King Jr. Extremists of justice. The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie, nor establish truth. Through violence, you murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice?